broader analysis of what is happening there. So then we are going to have the pleasure to listen Laila Iskander, who was the former Minister of Environment precisely in Egypt. And after that, we are going to give the floor to Dorothy Guerrero, which is our friend from Global Justice and also one of the most important, I would say, of inspiring activists in the environmental movement. I'm a person who knows very well how how the COPs works. After that, we're going to give the floor to know the situation in Iraq with our comrade Batool Aldagher, and we are going to finalize this first session with Ghalia Sasi, who's going to speak on the case of Libya. After that, we're going to make a short break with a video also, and after that, we go to the second session, which will start at 7, and it's going to be more focusing climate changes and the participation of women in the Arab region. Is the translation working? Can you hear me in Arabic? I'm not sure if you, or maybe do yeah, I'm not sure if you have this. Please give me a sign if you are listening in Arabic or not. Oh, the interpreter fell out for a moment. Anyway.
Okay, they say they can hear me now.
Okay.
Okay, they're fine. All is well.
Okay, thank you very much. So let us start the first session and give the floor to our this beautiful meeting of women from the Arabic region to talk about the question of the climate change. So let me start by saying that we are in a moment, all of us knows, really, really very, how to say it, it's a crossroad. It's a moment we need to take decisions. I mean, climate change is not a challenge anymore. It's a threat. It's a present threat. It's here. It's affecting our life, our economies, and it has to affect the way we understand the world and the future. And in that conversation, women must be inside. Not only because we are part, of course, of the world, but also because women in part of the world suffer especially the effects, terrible effects of the climate change. And we are going to talk about this particularly in the Arabic region. The main reason is because the next COP27 will be in El Cairo, and we want to be present there also to show and to share our vision and ideas from the feminist point of view and the women's point of view on this question. Because let me insist, it's a moment when all the different struggle from pacifist, ecologist movement, feminist movement must to be focused also in the idea that we need to stop the climate change and do it in a way where we need to push a lot, because what we discovered in our studies is that there is a huge gap between what the people feels or thinks about climate change and the governments are doing. Is that the government, they are denying or not acting enough or not acting at all, by the way, to stop climate change. And on the other hand, there is a huge conscious all around the world that we need to stop climate change and do it now. So in order to to fulfill this gap, I see from civil society, we need to push a lot, and particularly women, some particularly women in the Arabic region, which is an essential voice we would like also to share in El Cairo. So this is my small introducing remark. We are working here in Europe, in our continent, also with a lot of social movements on feminists, on pacifists, or individual and academics, of course, because when we are talking about climate change, we are not talking about an opinion. We are talking about facts, data, it's science, it's undeniable, it's irrefutable, it's out of the question that we need to change the world economic worlds, the world, economically speaking, is organized. It's a reality. It's something that literally we need to face to face. The data are there, so the solution also has to be there, and I'm sure we are going to talk about this. So let us start this first session on the impact of the climate change on women in the Arabic region, and it's a pleasure for me to give the floor to Dr. Laila Iskander, the ex-Minister of Environment of El Cairo. So Laila, please, 10 minutes, the floor is yours.
because social vulnerabilities are not experienced the same by men and women. So now the climate debate by women activist groups like yourselves is talking about climate justice and gender justice lenses to be used in the climate debate. So two things, climate justice and gender justice in it, because that describes policy directives much better than equity and equality. So we all know about the Paris Agreement. We need to bring temperatures down to 1.5 below before in the pre-industrial levels, and we want to reach net zero by 2050, which will require cutting emissions by 50% by 2030. And every country submits what they call NDCs, nationally determined contributions. These NDCs are what countries pledge they will do to bring down their emissions. And they say we also have drafted the national adaptation plans, NAMAs or NAPAs, or national mitigation plans. So there is a big debate about should we focus on this or that. Of course, the countries that are affected and not causing it are talking about adaptation, because we need to quickly do quick survival actions to prevent this. We go into the context of the effect of climate on gender, and we say that the majority of the 1.3 billion people living in the deepest poverty are women. In fact, 70% of these 1.3 billion. They work 2/3 of the world's hours, produce half the world's food, and 60 to 80% of staple crops. We're all screaming now from the food crisis with Ukraine. Well, let me tell you, of that food we're all looking for, 60 to 80% was grown by women. But look at this, they earn 10% of the income and they own less than 2% of the property. So when we talk about rural interventions for mitigation or adaptation, how can we talk about that while ignoring the 70%, the 60 to 80% of the rural crops that are grown by them? As for Arab countries, they contribute minimally. The policy paper goes on to examine international, regional, national, local level aspects of the climate change. At the international level, 43% of the global agricultural force is women, and they only own 15% of that land. They do not have property rights and face barriers to borrowing money for fertilizers, tools, and for harvesting their crops. So let me give you an example of what that means. You've all seen pictures on TV of the recent floods in Bangladesh. This land that has now been submerged is not owned by women. So what are all these women farmers going to do in Bangladesh today? Well, they will not be able to do anything because they don't own the land. They can't go anywhere to borrow the money. They don't have tools to save their crops, and they don't have access to markets to sell whatever they have been able to save from their crops. So they are absolutely destitute. So what are they going to do? Well, they're going to seek shelter somewhere. And this is a very problematic aspect because there's an awful lot of sexual assault they're exposed to, so they avoid shelters and end up homeless. Then, if they are lucky enough to leave their countries, they are not called migrant refugees, because up till now, UNHCR, the whole world, has not classified this new group that has to escape from this dreadful circumstance as climate refugees. So their land goes, their food goes, their money goes, they leave their countries, they are harassed in shelters, and they're not even called gender migrants. So now the UNFCCC Convention on Climate has just begun. Can you imagine? They only started in 2007. Was the first time ever at the meeting in Bali, the COP13, that was the first time they mentioned this business of gender theme, and it began appearing. Later on in 2010 in Lima, this was a landmark year. A work program on gender policy began for the first time mentioning gender and policy. Later, when they established the Green Climate Fund, there was no talk of this fund having to look at gender aspects, but Now, finally, in 2015, at the COP21 in Paris, only then in 2015 did the Green Climate Fund start saying, maybe we need to look at how gender sensitive the finances are. So since then, a number of conventions related to climate have begun referring to gender, the biological diversity, combined desertification, and so on. Now, what is really missing, we think, is that up till now, even when they have begun mentioning gender, they don't link it to sustainable development goals. It's as if climate is one thing, development is another. And that's what new policies have to call for. Every time a climate target is set.
Please slow down just a bit. Please slow down just a bit.
That relates to the SDGs, because the climate debate is a development debate, and that has to be addressed and recognized. Up till now, it doesn't. SDG 13, which is the one that talks the most about climate, has 6 targets on finance, technology, capacity building towards climate actions, but they fail to include gender equality in 9 of these targets, you know? So there is a real need to revisit all these.
Slow down a little bit, Laila, for the translation.
Okay. All right, sorry, it's because of the 10 minutes. I will slow down, sorry. So what is the language at the international level right now? It's still gender equality, gender responsive, gender disaggregated data. We're still not seeing anywhere gender justice. And when they talk about transitions to a green economy, to a zero carbon economy, there's a very little recognition that this transformation will always be skewed to the benefit of the rich and powerful. So in addition, and we just said 1.3 billion of the poorest of the poor are women. So if we are going to talk about transitions to green economies, we have to stop and say, okay, how is that going to impact women and the SDGs, and how is that related to sustainable development? So now the talk has begun about designing gender climate policies. What do we need to do that? Well, for one thing, organizations like yours have to start looking at what green organizations in the North are proposing. For instance, they say reduce access to fossil fuels in the South. Well, we didn't cause this. Our people are just beginning to access piped-in gas in our homes, for instance. When calls on the international level by green organizations in the North start pushing for restricted access to fossil fuels for us in the South, it means many of our women will have to go back to getting firewood, walking distances, and not having access to any kind of fuel until the whole world, the North, achieves this green transformation. At the Arab level, regionally, the Arab region was classified as a climate hotspot, and highest solar radiation was recorded here. In fact, in 2 cities, one in Basra and in Iraq, and Mitriba and Kuwait, where they reached 129 degrees recently. So in addition to this heat, there's water stress and a rising population, with 63% living in cities and heat islands growing. So what are we going to do with this heat, water stress, sea level rise, and all of the women having to work either in these heat islands or in drought affected areas with very little water? Nobody is talking about the details of what will happen to the Arab world and how any adaptation, mitigation, financing has to focus very specifically on women and their daily livelihoods. I will not go into the details of what the policy paper shows. You can read it. It talks about the occupied Palestinian territories. They are even going through more hardship to access water. They're being dumped on with sewage and garbage. So climate refugees are a growing international phenomenon, and nobody's talking about how we're going to address that. The governance structure of the climate change situation in the Arab world is presented. The League of Arab States provides the umbrella for the very high level agenda setting. Then ESCWA supports cooperation. And I list a number of non-state actors, but there are very few tables that NGOs or organizations, networks like yours are ever invited to. Even these ones, the ones I mentioned, have very weak regional collaborations, unclear targets, limited transparency, work in silos, have limited capacities to understand the language that's happening out there. So we call for new forms of representation, new roles and responsibilities for every actor in the architecture, and an investment. It's called a climate investment, even though it will not reduce the temperature. It will grow our capacity to propose gender just actions in the environment, which for now we complain and we document, but we still are not able to translate our knowledge in agriculture, in seed and genetic pool conservation. We're not able to translate these into projects. And to access the finance architecture, first you have to be accredited. It's very difficult. Or you join someone that's accredited, and then next you have to submit a project. We need capacities to do all these things, and that would be from climate finance. That is still not recognized as an important thing to finance. So we need gender just climate policies that are closely linked to gender just models of sustainable development. What will they look like? First, have to submit to gender analysis, a systemic one. Any policy that's proposed has to submit to that scrutiny. And we have to gather and utilize gender disaggregated data and put our own benchmark and indicators, and ensure that our national adaptation programs, our NAPAs, all include gender dimensions, because so far they have failed to adapt them. At the local level, where all this architecture, money, dialogue, finance doesn't reach local levels. So currently local governments, civil society groups, informal organizations are not included, neither in national nor international decision-making processes. And donors prefer to deal with governments, give money to mega projects without looking at the representation, the context, the accountability, the responsiveness, and gender justice as a central part of projects. The representation and decision-making, even for the North, by the way, women are not represented in a very good way in the COP committees, in the delegations, or in many of the financing bodies, UNFCCC, Global Environment Facility, many of them, Green Climate Fund, they're not there. So happily, a lot of gender indices have come on the scene, and we need to use these to say, hey, how come we're not there? So many efforts from the North have begun to count, all right? And that's good. We now have a gender development index, gender empowerment measure, gender inequality index, women, peace and security index, social institutions, gender index, and on and on and on. I have listed them in the policy paper, and it's good for us to insert ourselves and to provide all of these data banks with our data. So
just 1 minute, please. Please go on, 1 minute.
Okay. 1 minute left, you mean? I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
ليلى مرجا بتقول قدامك دقيقة.
Yeah. So we talk about adaptation, how it must not be just mega projects, but look at women's practices and at procedural justice and distributive. Procedure is how we make decisions. Distributive is how we access funds and decision-making. We talk about adaptation. Mitigation is gender blind. Technology is not gender blind either. It's always biased. We need to make sure the technology is skewed towards us. The financing is still not reflecting us. We need to do that. And not just public finance. A lot of private sector and banking sectors are financing climate change, but they go for very expensive mega projects like carbon capture and sequestration, rather than going into things that we do at the local level. So finally, there is now a huge effort to do a disaster risk reduction. And in fact, the conference in Hyogo in Japan and in Sendai were the first ones to really put gender center stage. In conclusion, we have to make sure that climate justice has gender justice centrally in the debate and in COP agreements. And it cannot be comprehensive if we ignore half the world. And we have to make sure we're represented, we make decisions, we're counted, we access finance that's decided by us, assessments must be done by us, technology must be skewed to our needs, and the gender lens has to be included in decision-making, planning, execution at all levels, local, national, regional, international.
Thank you very much, Laila.
Thank you.
We have your policy paper, so I think we can go
Yes,
deep
you
in
can
these
read it, yes.
unbelievable ideas, very important ideas like a gender justice on all your suggestions. So thank you very much. So let's go quick to Dorothy Guerrero. She is the head of policy of global justice, and she's from Philippines, but she's living in London. Please take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Marga, and also thank you to Laila for that very comprehensive discussion, especially on the policy focus of that discussion. I think what I will do to complement that also is that I will share what are the key points or the key issues, the key demands, and the key debates, especially in terms of how do we change the rules of the game to be able to address the climate crisis or the climate emergency. So as mentioned by Laila, in the recent and also the more important development in the global push for climate justice is that it is now acknowledged as a global problem requiring global solution based on justice and solidarity. And when we talk about justice and solidarity, that also means incorporating gender justice in all the discourse and all the discussions. Secondly, the issue of leaving fossil fuels in the ground also gain more legitimacy as the most viable response to climate change. There is a political consensus, not just among activists, but also among progressive governments as well, that we have to address the issue of the fact that fossil fuels actually is the main cause of climate change. However, despite that consensus between movement, scientists, key people in policy, that it is a key part, and also that renewable energy is part of the solution, there is still a debate on, okay, how do we go about ending fossil fuel use and at the same time fast-tracking the renewable energy. Yesterday, I was also in a conference of Rural Women's Action. It's a Southern Africa network with about 14 women's groups from 14 African countries. And what they highlighted as the main challenge for women on a material, practical sense also is how to solve the energy poverty in Africa, considering that it is one of the challenges for many women in their day-to-day life. Third, I will go back to that issue also. Third, there is also, although connected to the ending or phase out of fossil fuels, there is an increasing question on how do we manage and control this sector, meaning the fossil fuels and energy sector, in the short and medium term. At the same time, there is also a question on, even if we solve the energy poverty and there will be enough energy, which is a big if, because considering now that we are, there's a war in Europe, there's a war due to the invasion of Russia, of Ukraine, there is a big problem now of energy crisis. So if we address that crisis and considering that there will be energy, there is still a question, what will that energy be for whom, what for? Because as we have seen in many, many decades, when addressing the problem of energy poverty, most of the time, the energy that is produced does not actually go for the needs of communities, especially women. So these issues are where major conflicts remain unacknowledged. And then, of course, in the negotiation, there is that factor as well, that the issue of mitigation, adaptation, and the means of implementation are not balanced. In the last COP26 in Glasgow, there's more focus on mitigation,
I think we are
but then at
losing
the same
Dorothy.
time, the solutions that are being promoted is more on the on using net zero as a basis, which is very, very problematic because it's not an appropriate solution. It's not based on justice.
Sorry, she's cutting too much.
More of putting the. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
We hear you, but it's cutting a little. Please go on. Let's try.
I don't know if I lost her or she's gone.
I think she tried to come back again. I don't know if she's here with us. Anyway, let me suggest, in order not to waste more time, we can come back to Dorothy when Dorothy is coming back to us, if you don't mind, because it was really very interesting. And also I have some questions about the civil society participation in the COP26 in Glasgow to prepare the next one. So before Dorothy come back, let's go to an Arabic country, which is Iraq. I'm really looking forward. Sorry? Okay, so I think we can go to our next panelist, if you agree. And then let's go to Iraq. So I'm really looking forward to him, Batool Aldagher from Women's Rights Center in Iraq. So please.
السلام عليكم.
Salam alaikum. Please, the floor is yours.
نعم. شكرا طبعا للجميع.
Thank you very much all. Thank you, Ms. Laila, for this beautiful presentation, and thank you all for this organization. As for the policy paper of Iraq and the climate change and its impact on Iraqi women, at the beginning, I'd like to give you an overview of the climate changes that take place. The climate changes have implications in Iraq, which are very clear. Through there's a decrease in the percentage of rainfall, like about 30% of previous years, and the increase in temperature to above 50 degrees temperature, and the increase in the sandstorms, and the increase in the suffocations and drought, which had destroyed the crops, which led to poverty, violence, displacement of women. Of course, these implications, climate impacts, have impacted the general life in general in Iraq, and these impacts were clear in sectors that had direct impact with women, socially, health-wise, and so on, because 7 million Iraqis were impacted up till now from drought, and from this percentage, the percentage of impacted women were 4 million out of 7 million. So in Iraq, as we see, Iraq is facing serious challenges, since it's the fifth country in the world that was impacted by climate change, pollution, drought, and sandstorms, and the decrease in water revenues, which impacted water and food, and accordingly impacted the food security and national security, and taking into consideration the Paris Protocol 2021. However, these implications, there are common grounds between these phenomena, is impact all society of all aspects in different levels, which had impacted negatively women and threatened their rights and excluding them from active participation in all plans and strategies and negotiation in finding solutions to all problems and crises. And the impacts that the categories that are most impacted are women. Women is the highest percentage, then children, then elderly, and then sick and persons with disabilities. Main or key threats that happen to women due to climate change. First, women are subject, pregnant women and children are subject to the threat of no food security. Also, that leads to early childbirth, and especially for young mothers, and increase the poverty percentage to 51%, which led to more economic pressure due to this climate change, and accordingly leading to early child marriage as a way to mitigate the impact of this climate change on the families. And then this child marriage had led to increasing divorce rate by 30% from previous years. The threats that threatens are the threats that threaten us and threaten the world is impacting women who work in rural areas or are dependent to the ecological systems. Women, subjecting women and children are subject to gender-based violence and sexual harassment and human trafficking because of this displacement and unstable migration. Girls are deprived from education because of the halt of these activities, and therefore adding to the increase of illiteracy between women. Inequality also between gender is also related to this climate change, and that the fragility of women's status due to the climate change is based on the customs and traditions of inequality between the two genders, which leads to equal opportunities for breadwinning and not accessing or controlling lands and other productive issues. Therefore, there were no legal rights, political or professional rights for women in Iraq. The solutions, and there are challenges, but I know that time is not enough, and but I'm quickly presenting the challenges and the reasons that have impacted women's situations in Iraq. First, Iraq is located in Southwest Asia. 54% of the lands in Iraq are subject to drought, which is affecting 39% of the area of Iraq. Also, building huge dams from neighboring countries like Turkey and Iran have led to the migration of water, therefore depriving Iraq to receiving water, which is negatively affecting our agricultural products. Also, transport and other sectors, related sectors, are impacted because of the infrastructure that is anyway impacted before the climate change, like industrial sector, commercial, tourism sectors. These are related to the transport sector, and these are impacted because of the weak infrastructure of the transport sector. Iraq had to allocate part of its budget to fund its military activities to liberate some cities and or areas, and this is a real challenge that had contributed in diverting the potentials of the people and hindering the implementation of projects that would lead to the development of Iraq due to the climate change. What added to this is the pandemic that emerged in 2020, and it's still ongoing. Of course, proposed solutions on the international and national and regional level and civil society organizations level. On the international level, everybody knows that the Paris Agreement was set to identify the objectives, and it's 197 countries were engaged in this agreement to mitigate or the emissions of gas of the greenhouse gas, and to stop the increase in temperature worldwide, in order to support so the support was coming from developed countries to underdeveloped countries. The UN also, so we're talking here on an international level, is providing support to Iraq to mitigate the implications of climate change and to adapt to it through sustainable projects that focus on raising opportunities for employment and livelihood, which would strengthen investments in infrastructure, in sewage, irrigation, and managing the consumption of water. On the national level, rules and regulations and laws and regulations have led the Iraqi legislator have passed many laws to protect the environment and enhancing it, including the law of protection and enhancing environment 97 to up to 2009. But regretfully, in reality, it's not implemented because of the big challenges that happened before the climate change. As we said, it's terrorism and the COVID-19 crisis. Second, strategies and education. In order to guarantee an active engagement of women in the society and to build a sustainable future in order to encounter the climate changes, gender was introduced in all national documents, which include the National Development Plan 2018 to 2022. Second, the vision of Iraq for a sustainable development for 2030. Three, the national strategy to elevate the status of Iraqi women, and fourth, the social contributions, and five, the adaptation. Six, research. So encountering climate change needs research, scientific research, and technological development in order to use it and utilize it in industry, in development of transport tools. So all this is related to climate change. So in order to mitigate this implication and to adapt on it. So the state have given special attention to this and have given support and opportunities for masters and PhD students to conduct their studies and surveys regarding climate change, and to increase the cognitive aspect that could be seen in different and new researches and studies that would serve the society in this regard. Fourth, the relationship of synergy between the different governmental sectors and non-governmental sectors and civil society in order to build synergies between the different sectors and building partnerships with civil society in order to pave the way to develop and implement the plans to serve all sectors that are impacted by climate change. And in the framework of national and sector strategies that are related to climate change, like water and agriculture, national strategy, and ecological national economy, and complementary for risk risk management, and related to natural catastrophes. So this is to strengthen the functionality in these fragile sectors. Setting the name is there are two A and B. First is funded by the Green Fund and the UNDP, that will be within the basic plans that will be counted on in implementing this policy in order to guarantee flexibility to all national sectors, fragile sectors. Of course, it's to revive these areas in Furat. This is focusing on integrating this with international and regional initiatives in order to adapt with the climate in the near future, which includes 9 projects. It's to invest in the green gardens, water management, sewage management, Shatt al-Arab, and the sewage transformation. And then to control the emissions in order to give from implementation and the carbon dioxide, and this is also based on new technology. The efforts of civil society organizations and their feminist paths, and they've taken upon their shoulders to raise awareness of the environment and conducting campaigns to pressure decision makers that would instigate the citizens to rationalize their use of and consumption of water, to raise awareness about the also awareness of rationalizing the consumption of energy in which like using LED in all governmental and commercial buildings, to help women survivors of gender-based violence to be able to recover from this, and to empower them to be part of these support projects to encounter the risks of climate change and initiatives in the different societies that are related to combating this, and to work 2 main points, to the points, yes, because there's a lot to be said. Okay, 2 main points, 2 other points to respond to women, whether relief and to respond to the strategy, and to develop other plans in order to focus on women and to support two initiatives in order to enhance the environment, and to allocate annual budget to implement strategy for rural women that was approved by the American government. And then to encourage the media to support women and to raise awareness of women about the climate change and its impact on women and the coherence of women. And my final point, lobbying campaigns to design for early response related to climate change, whether in or drought, to face droughts or sandstorms and so on. So this is in brief, because this there's no time. So this is what was prepared by women. So this is it. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking long.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. But it was really inspiring and interesting, all what you said, and particularly the final recommendations that is also in the paper. Yeah, we can come back later at the end of this session. So let's come back again to Dorothy. Dorothy is again with us. So please, for a few minutes, Dorothy, you have the floor if you are here.
Yeah. Yeah. How much more time do I have?
I will say
5 or
3-4
7, or
minutes if
because I don't even know where I was cut. Okay, so I forgot where I was cut actually, but I was mentioning that now climate change will no longer needed to be argued, and it's now in people's psyche, and people know that it exists. So the remaining.
Dorothy, you are unmuted. Please use your microphone. Is this suited? Yeah.
Climate. So my phone is intervening because I'm not in the office. We have a public event in 1.5 hours, and I'm supposed to facilitate it. So I'm outside. Okay. How we approach, what solutions do we need? The number one solution people are saying is that we should leave fossil fuels in the ground, because fossil fuels is a main source of emission that is driving climate change. But then at the same time, and linked to this, the fossil fuel stoppage will not happen overnight. We needed a just transition in order to have this change from using fossil fuels to a more renewable form of energy. And in that transition, there are many conflicts that are rising, because one, there's a question of two conflicts, actually, two general conflicts. One is the interstate conflicts, because as we know, in many countries, especially the developing countries, many of those energy sources or sectors are not national. They are mostly owned by transnational corporations. So there is a conflict on who will manage, who will fund, who will finance, who will access, what kind of distribution, at the same time for what use, for what end, and for what purpose. Secondly, there's also an interclass conflict, because climate change is also very much a class issue. The relations between humans, and at the same time, the relations between nature and humans are governed by the fact that we are following the capitalist mode or system wherein profiteering is the primary, has a primary importance. So in this reality, it is often the needs of the villains that are set aside, the needs of the community, and there's always the question of what are the priority. So the priority often are dictated in the negotiation by the rich countries, by those who actually cause the climate change, and at the same time you have the developing countries who contributed so little to it, but could not raise their voice or get their agenda as a central agenda. So in this conflict, as I mentioned, women's voices and agenda seldom became the priority. So it's good, Laila mentioned earlier, and also the speaker before me, that we have to put the women's agenda in the top priority. But then again, the question of who will essentially reap the benefit of the transition is another problem of the adjustment. Because when we say we are solving climate change, there is always the cost and benefit, apart from who's to blame, whose failure it is that we are not addressing climate change. So in the pace of that process, the scope, the depth, and the degree to which the transition process will happen is a question as well, because will it be orderly or destructive? Will it be planned or market-led? Or will it be a peaceful or violent process? Because we are talking here of materials, we're talking here of resources, ownership, control, and access to these resources. And the outcome of these conflicts will be determined by the balance of forces in society on a global and at the same time national and local level. So in the negotiation, we're talking about the need for mitigation and the need for adaptation, and as well as the need for finding a means of implementation, which means climate finance, and at the same time transfer of technology to developing countries. And this question should be at the center of the discussion in COP27. In COP26, there was a big frustration, although many are expecting it. Climate finance was not dealt with at the level that we would have wanted. Even the need for the climate facility was blocked by the EU, the US, the UK countries, and they settled on a compromise term of dialogue. But the problem is, even in the last meeting in Bonn, that dialogue does not necessarily end up with the fact that there will be a discussion on climate finance. And when we are talking here of climate finance, the IPCC document also acknowledged that there is an obligation from developed countries to the developing countries. And we are talking of how much. It's not just the $100 billion that is not yet delivered or promised, and an obligation from COP15, but we are talking here of between $5 trillion to $11 trillion. So that's the costing. So
Dorothy, can you summarize the last minute, please?
So the main battle in COP27 in Egypt, and at the same time this will be pursued as well in COP28, is the question of how do we get a fair share when it comes to responsibility, climate finance, how do we come up with the appropriate target for climate finance. At the moment, it's not appropriate. The $100 billion is not the appropriate amount. We're talking between 5 to 11 trillion. And third, when we talk about adaptation, we also talk about who owns the technology, who owns the resources. At the moment, there's a big fight shown by the COVID-19 that when we come to necessary technology, it is controlled by intellectual property rights. It's controlled by transnational corporations. So my last point maybe is that when we think of who to target, what kind of solutions, first, we need to rebalance the power. We need to change the rules of the games between the state, the corporations, so that the rights and needs of people will become dominant. So sorry for these problems with the connection, and I hope to be with you in continuing discussion.
Listening to you is always so interesting. I always learn. So thank you very much, Dorothy, for making your inputs in our seminar. So let's go to the last part. We are over time, 8 minutes, but anyway, let's continue and go now to Libya. So Ghalia Sasi is with us. So please, Ghalia, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to have heard my colleagues and their rich papers. Mine will be slightly different. Of course, they have summarized a number of things about the problems women suffer from across the world. And therefore, I would be specializing in Libya, or maybe highlighting Libya, because its geographical location is very important. So the climate change affects the Libyan areas damaged and fragmented by the war. Libya is one of the less countries in terms of facing the risks of climate change based on the World Bank report. There is also scarcity of water resources in addition to droughts and the bad soil, or which made the country depend or rely on importing rather than exporting, or maybe meeting its or maybe self-reliance on its products, its local products, due to the wars, of course, and due to the climate change. The precipitation retreat would also lessen the underground water, along with the high and increasing temperatures, which also affects the crops, the production by 80%. I would share an example on increasing dry and drought in Libya. Libya, especially the areas close to the coast, like Awania, in the southern western part of Tripoli. It has agricultural areas and is considered a huge and important a key agricultural resource for the population and the population of Tripoli. But due to the struggle that started in 2011, farmers had to leave. They were forced to leave their homes, their lands, and when they came back after 6 years of struggle to their land, there was drought and very dry, which also affected the infrastructure. Such harms also affected the climate and the weather in Libya. The southern areas don't have rain, and thus they are threatened with the floods, like Harad flood in the western southern part of Libya, which is on the border of Algeria. So this entire area, the people started to leave their places, and a big of displacement to the northern areas, and women have become also subjected to this displacement. More than 2,500 families had to leave, the majority of which were women. And of course, there was a strong also the support by the CSOs in Libya through the UN for the UNFPA, and women were treated, the harmed women were addressed and treated against the floods, and they were provided with the necessary food. Of course, Libya has another thing that everybody needs to know, that it is considered, it has a great carbon CO2 emission of 59.4 million tons a year. So because it's an oil country, and it nourishes at least about 20% of the oil of the fuel of Southern Europe, and therefore the emission is increasing by 4% annually, and therefore there's an increase of the temperatures and the CO2, and the most affected are women. As women, we try to contribute to mitigating this by creating startups and activating rural areas, development areas, and urging women to try to find new ways of agriculture methods so that they would become to mitigate the risks of climate change. And we do have a project funded by the EU and the DRI to activate water agriculture in the agricultural areas, and to also activate the women farmers or, women in the rural areas to use their farms in order to mitigate such risks. There's a great challenge facing women. We know that Libya ratified the climate change treaty on June 6, 2021, and it was authorized by the parliament in September. The National Committee for the Climate Change was renamed by the Minister of Environment. However, the government did not engage any women in this committee, which constitutes a great challenge, because the absence of women in such decision-making positions means that they did not address the needs of women. And therefore, gender here should be worked on with the government. There is also another challenge by the international organizations who support Libya. They don't act, Libya is not a stable country, so they try to support Libya to find stability. We find the international organizations does not allocate financial support to women in the rural areas, but rather to do political empowerment, despite the fact that Libya needs at this stage needs to empower more women economically in order to be able to overcome this climate change. So we need the support of the international organizations to change their policies in terms of supporting women inside Libya and to urge them confront the climate change. Another thing is that the local institutions here, women have to struggle strongly with all their power to include the national plan, to engage women in the national plan in all the aspects and all the decision-making positions, so that we can be able to overcome the climate change. Libya is considered a state that has huge or vast areas of the Sahara, and therefore we need to operate or to substitute energy, which is the solar energy, but there is no parties or sides to give this attention, and they only consume low oil. When we have power outage, also this power outage causes the more increase in the temperature due to the emissions of the electric generators. I'm talking now to you. There's a lot of interruption, and also the sounds of the power electric outage and the emissions of gas. I can cut. Libya is considered an important country in the northern part of Africa, and women, and it's very close to the European also area. We are not an industrial country, but we do have emissions, gas emissions, huge gas emissions due to the fact that Libya is an oil country and it exports oil to abroad to the foreign countries. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ghalia, for this important, how important it is to know about the Libyan situation related with climate change and also with women. So with this contribution, we ended our first session of the impact of the climate change in the on women in the Arabic region. So I think that it's time to see a video our comrade Fatma has prepared. Barbara, can you display it? I don't know if it is possible. Okay, let me check later if we can put it when it's available. So I would suggest that we are out of time some minutes. So I would prefer to go directly to our second session because it was prepared like 10 minutes of discussion between all of us. But I think it's really interesting to give the voice and the time for all of our participants to speak, to listen to them. So my proposal, when the video is ready, we can put it. Oh, it's here with us. Can somebody tell us if there is some technical problem or not, or shall we wait for a moment?
أحمد أنت قادر تعرض الفيديو؟ Marga, I think he's still trying, but we can move on until, they solve the problem.
Okay, so I ask to give some time to resolve this problem so we can see the video. Maybe we can see it after to close the session. So we have time to reorganize it. And let's go to our second session today, which is the climate justice and the participation of women in the Arabic region. So our first speaker in this session will be Fatma Afid, for the labor unionist from Morocco. So Fatma, such a pleasure to see you. The floor is yours for 10 minutes.
مساء الخير من المغرب.
Good evening from Morocco. Greetings all. I listened to all the interventions, and we're in the Arab network of women. We need all these reports and data on the policies followed in the East and Moroccan countries, because that would be important for the future participation, also in our participation in the international events and the conference that will be held, COP27 in Egypt, and there's another one in Qatar. I tried in this presentation, which is really a summary or a short summary that we can, of course, send to you send you reports that are more detailed on the situation in Morocco. There are many policies and reports, so I focused here on three issues I wanted to share with you. First, the general context or the public context. We don't disagree that climate change today is occupying the priority.
لا يمكنها تأجيل النظر في هذه القضية لأنها قضية كونية أو كما يقال نحن كلنا اليوم يعني
So we are all today we're like riding the Titanic with a poor and rich, and if the decision makers did not take, we will all take the good decisions, we will all drown under this climate change. So those who did the pollution caused it, and the victims will all drown together. So we all need to know that this is affecting us all, but it affects women in particular, because women are the most fragile in this world. And this is a report that has been issued by The Hague. It's a governmental institutions where its last report confirmed that those women who live in poverty and fragility will suffer the most and will need more to be able to adapt. And so women are the most fragile because of the huge difference between women and men on the different levels regarding roles, responsibilities, and the nature and needs. So in order to be able to, so this means that the whole world understands this. The whole world knows the fragility that women suffer from and the direness that they face. And still this climate change is still increasing the crisis of women. Everybody knows that as for Morocco, Marrakesh is one of the beautiful cities. It has a strategic location, although it's a strategic location, and it's overlooking the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, and it's African and Arab depth. So Morocco had, so it's rich, and but is this richness and all this is it distributed in a fair and just way for all? Also for those all that have this have hosted the 7th climate conference in 2001, and it was the first conference dealing with the concept of gender equality within decisions taken by the international parties. Morocco renewed the experience with its hosting of the 22nd COP in Marrakesh in 2016, but there's a big difference. This is what we're talking about. It's how can we invest these conventions and treaties in order to be able to advocate, to engage women in these negotiations in order to acquire their rights. I will quickly just tell you about the public policies in Morocco, because we cannot advocate without knowledge, and this has been discussed. We need we need to know the laws, legislations, policies. This will help a lot in the advocating and in acquiring what we aim to. So Morocco, as the most Moroccan countries, will have to tackle and this will they live in drought areas that are floods. So Morocco is for sure when it ratifies a treaty, this treaty should be interpreted into reality. So I tried to check what did Morocco had signed, and at least for instance gender equality treaties. So so signing on this is not signing an agreement is not, or a treaty is not enough, but these treaties and conventions need to be adapted with national laws. So also there is CEDAW, for instance. This is a very important treaty because it is the first convention that had ratified the rights of women and the and the equality between them. So it was ratified by Morocco in 1993. However, that's not enough, and we're in our daily struggle to ratify a convention. It wasn't interpreted in policies, and it has this also having it in the still we have a long way to struggle in order to implement it. Also, as for the National Convention for Human Rights, Economic, Social, and in Morocco, it had ratified this, and we all know that its importance in terms of non-discrimination. Another thing, another important is about the ecological variation. This, in its third paragraph, it confirmed engaging women on all levels related to, and it was signed in 1995, and then the agenda of 2021 and Rio, which where always there's confirmation about engagement of women, and then the UN Convention of combating drought and desertation. But all these are treaties that Morocco had ratified, and also it had ratified the framework. But this convention did not address the main issue. So why is it there? We need to demand a protocol, to have a protocol that is designated to compare what is really implemented. So we need to have like this agenda to be implemented, but so it's not. It did not give the real space for gender equality. Also, Peking protocol and an agreement, and here we say that in our daily struggle it's not enough, but we need to sign. But this ratification need to be reflected in all.
1 minute more, if you can summarize in 1 minute. I know it's not much time, sorry, but
So there are different strategies and plans, but I will now move quickly to the civil society demands to implement what we seek to find. We demand to have a real democracy, to establish a real democracy, to gain trust among the people and decision between citizens and decision makers. So the engagement of citizens is very weak, and this will impact the implementation of what we seek to have regarding policies or engaging gender sensitive policies. Also, we need to demand to amend the laws that addresses the environmental crimes, and also to avoid the new liberal economic laws through different coalitions, raising awareness. So we need to push towards engaging women on a national level, and we need to strengthen and consolidate women's capacities in engaging the women's situation. Thank you very much.
thank you very much, Fatma, for your contributions. And let's go now to another country, which is Egypt, where the next COP will be. So it's a pleasure to give the floor to a woman all of us know, which is Fatemah Khafagy from the Arabic States Civil Society Organizations and Feminist Networks. So Fatma, please.
Thank you very much, Marga. I'll be short because we're tight on time. مصر زي زميلاتي من البلاد العربية الأخرى.
Egypt is like the rest of the other Arab world suffer from similar problems, scarcity of energy resources, decrease of the delta land, which would add to the high level of the sea, increasing the level of the sea, the scarcity of water due to the Nahda Dam, and Ethiopia in terms of the Nahda Dam regarding women. The same thing applies. Unfortunately, women in Egypt, when we look at our rank on the index, the different rank on the international and regional index, the status of Egyptian women is retracting, and it's not doing any progress. The majority women would be, of course, are subjected to the negative effect or impact of the climate. We would find 40% of women employment is in the agricultural sector. We expect that this agricultural sector would be affected a lot by the climate change. Women work as peasants based on the seasonal farming, and she works for the household free of without any income. If we look at statistics, we would find that 5%, only 5% of the landowners are women. It's women who work in land intensively, but they don't own the land in the majority, in the most of the cases, including the inheritance laws. She can't. There are some social pressures exerted on women, so that they have to give up their rights to inherit. They are pressured by their families. And there are some land reclamation and agricultural projects. Women are not involved, as well as the distribution of land. I think the main or the basic issue is when we started to suffer from the COVID-19. During the COVID-19, women owned very little of the diverse economic resources. So it's not just in land. If you look into the housing, or owning a house, or other bank accounts, her access to loans, women are denied access to economic resources, productive resources. She is denied access to information, to take part in decision making, to be able to access the new modern technology. Egypt has set the 2050 climate change policy that it announced in Glasgow last year. 5 main objectives, goals. First one, to provide renewed energy resources, build capacity to adapt and resist, increase the capacity of the health sector to confront any negative effects. Also one talking about the changes in the agricultural crops, and another about the protection and early warnings. Another goal was about improving good governance and managing resources, and Egypt to have Egypt to get access to assistance, financial assistance, not in loans actually. So there was a recommendation to invest as opposed to getting foreign loans. And Egypt can use the local resources as a huge resource. The fourth thing is to improve the infrastructure necessary to establish projects for climate change. This was one of the goals. And the fifth one was scientific research and knowledge, the generation, technological generation and the promising line, especially for the students and the population. So getting all these segments, mainly the students, together with the decision makings about involving technology in the climate change. When we read this strategy, I couldn't find women involved or even mentioned here, or a gender perspective into this. Whatever affects the population is one thing without differences. So we are still as if the COVID-19 did not teach us anything. There are no lessons learned. The decision makers were surprised. The policymakers were surprised that, and they admitted that COVID-19 has impacted many women, actually men more than women more than men, because they found out that violence was really on the rise, especially those who were on in the front lines. They were women, especially in the health provisions services. We expected that to be similar to failing to engage women in the climate change topic. All the colleagues mentioned this, too many things I don't want to repeat, because the civil society demands or requests similar things in Egypt, but there are two very clear things that we need to work on, that we need to intensify our work on and to try to achieve them before the COP27. First, there is scarcity of information, no information for the vulnerable or for the needy women, for example, and even the needy men and the youth in the rural areas. The illiterate women who constitute 30% in Egypt, and that's not little. There are no information about that there is climate change, that there is impact, and that there are means to protect ourselves. There are too many things that we have to be ready for. So these data are inaccessible, are not available. The civil society tries to disseminate such information, but we are 100 million. So the government needs to take part in disseminating such information. We can't just be hosting the COP27 next November. If you, for example, even an educated person, if you stop him on street and ask him about the climate change, he would say, he or she would say no. So we need this dissemination of information, especially the refugees, the displaced women. They have no idea, no clue what the climate change whatsoever is. The situation of involving women in the government issues, in the negotiations conducted by the government that will be conducted in Sharm el-Sheikh, there needs to be women involved, especially from the civil society and the other women networks, because the gender vision must be involved in all the developed policies, in the projects, in the requests, whether small or big projects. The financing women, despite all that, women make so many things in recycling, in the recycling. Laila talked about millions of dump and waste that is rebuilt or recycled. They can do a lot of effort to come up with very good things. They need to the support of the government. Women can do and achieve so many things, even at little levels that are not announced, and there's no financing also, which is another problem. The last thing I want to share is regarding COP27. This issue is there's still no transparency how to engage in the COP27. There's no transparency. Egypt established a website and said, please register, but this is insufficient. This is who would you be accepting? For example, a person to register and find no acceptance. Who should we look for? Or those who registered from last year? But this is not the correct way to facilitate our presence, and it would not it has to be facilitated to tens and thousands to facilitate the presence of many people. We need to exert pressure on our government, not just here, but in the other Arab countries in the region. We need to be heard. Our voices need to be heard in the forums, all the forums, including the COP27 and all the events at the government level. There needs to be a strong lobby. Sorry for taking much of your time. Thank you.
Excellent, Fatemah. Such an amazing things coming from Egypt, which is the place we are going to meet, I hope, during the COP27. Let's go to the last case, which is the case of Jordan. So let's give the floor to Rawan Sabbah through the Arabic Women Association of that beautiful country. So please, the floor is yours.
مساء الخير لكنا جميعا.
Good afternoon all. I'm really happy to be in this seminar and to listen to the presentations of my colleagues in the Arab world about the impact of the climate change on women and the valuable information they shared. I would go straight into the topic. I would speak about the climate change in Jordan. We know that there is we all agree there's agreement that the climate change is affecting the world as a whole, but it's also especially affecting the popular and rural areas in the developing countries, mainly the vulnerable women. It also affects the environment, which affects poverty and hunger, and basically on agriculture. So climate change is not an environment issue, but it's a basic issue that affects the social, economic, and adaptation problems. Recent developments show or prove that climate change affects the food security and causes a rise of costs of basic foods, and this leads to more poverty, and also it affects the SDGs of 2030 agenda. I can say here that our country needs correct and sound planning and providing opportunities of food security, and to try to
هش جدا تجاه التأثير السلبي للتغير المناخي والحصول على إمدادات المحاصيل الغذائية.
Okay, so we need to have, I was asking her to slow down, she's too fast. We need the support of the world, just similar to the other Arab world, Arab countries, the third world countries that need coordination among the government departments and to face the difficult and harsh conditions, and to try to find means of response in order to eventually save Jordan. And there has to be a support for the agricultural sector and development in the governorates, and the wise management of water, in addition to engaging the grassroots in finding solutions. If we speak about the women's role in adaptation, all agree that the women's role is important in adapting with the climate change, which is based on the capacities, women's capacities of adapting to correct and sound management of resources, mainly women in the rural areas. Unfortunately, like I said before, the negative impact is on the vulnerable and marginalized groups, mainly women, all age groups, especially those who have who are responsible for their households, which is more than 12% of women, of Jordanian and Syrian women in Jordan. They are in charge of their households. International experts and local expertise shows that women are not taken into considerations. Their needs are taken into account in planning and development. There is a gender gap, whether in terms of the income or wages of male and female, or denial of property, and also the right to take decisions. Talking here about the agricultural sector, there's a huge gap in the male and female wages. This takes us to how to recruit women and the other marginalized groups. Also, the disasters due to climate change, resulting from climate change, that also affect women being marginalized. Marginalized women are able to come to do or to develop alternative strategies, and with the absence of food security, if the government is not keen to confront the reduction of crops, it should rely on women also in managing the natural resources. And this was taken from practical positions of women in many countries, especially involving women in agricultural products. Women and girls or young girls in Jordan are very vulnerable to climate change. They, at the time where they face political, economic, and legislative obstacles in order to access their rights equally with men. The participation of women in the labor market and the policy is still low. Even though they have university degrees, more than their male peers. Also, the climate change does not only affect women, but it also has different impact on the gender as a whole. So the procedures should not be, they should also be in line with the gender, and to mitigate the vulnerability and its effect on the marginalized groups, mainly women and girls. We need also to focus on the communities who rely on agriculture, because they are more vulnerable to displacement due to that climate change, and are facing also a deterioration of the ecological system and the biodiversity. We want Jordan women to work side by side with men in setting the strategies and trying to find participatory solutions based on the collaboration of all the parties, in addition to commitment or obligation in terms of distributing the roles and the budgets, also involving women in order to have an integral roles of both in addressing the climate change, also providing capacity building training for women, and to benefit from the connecting the fifth goal and the other SDG goals, and commitment to the international conventions and treaties, in order for us all to be working together to build the capacities in facing the climate change. Our recommendations to change the use of the fossil fuels, try to use alternative clean energy. This necessitates a lot of incentives and motivations that we also need to support community initiatives and the creative ideas, like building walls to stop the increasing sea level, and also to give more care to the educational and school curriculum, do more awareness, especially with the new generations about the climate change, also to help women make their voices heard, and listen to the women working in the non-official sectors, mainly the agricultural, because they are marginalized. They don't hear their voices, they don't hear the problems of women in this sector, and to focus on the women's participation in the trainings, taking into account their needs and their capacities. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you, Rawan, for really such an interesting information we share this afternoon. So we have like 22 minutes to the end of our seminar today, so I will suggest it to divide it into 10 minutes for a discussion. After 10 minutes, I will suggest to put the video, prepare, and after that, I will ask our friend Fatemah to lead the idea of the conclusions of and the step forwards of what we should to do in this question. So I will encourage the woman who has not taken the floor yet, who were not part of the participants, who take the floor, please, so we can know more about other countries or another perspective. So please, if you want to take the floor, do it directly or write your name in the chat, or use the small hand to put it there so we can start the debate. Dorothy Guerrero is written in the chat that she has to leave for a feminist to prepare for another public event, that she will come back in 5 or 7 minutes. So who wants to take the floor? And let me insist in encouraging the the participant who has not taken the floor yet to do it if they want, of course. Maybe it's a good idea to try to put the video now then. Oh, we have Afaf with us who was to share with us some ideas. So please take the floor.
شكرا
Thank
لكم.
you. I'm sorry that I signed in late. I had some kind of confusion in terms of time, but I didn't listen to all the presentations, but I would like to share some facts about Palestine. I'm from Palestine. I would start with the change environment as a whole. The climate change is a new a topic that is attracting the attention and that is open for discussions. Many of the platforms and countries might consider it as a secondary topic, even though it's very important. And I believe discussing it is a great thing. Let me also say, how can us as women, this is a question that needs that needs a debate, needs action and strategic plans. How can us as women be involved in this topic at all levels in our countries? Based on previous meetings and interventions and papers that I heard, there is a lot of approaches, and there's a big approach or comparison in the Arab world and even with the entire world. And in the Arab and Levant areas, there are too many similarities. So it's the same suffering at all levels. When we speak about agreements, the agreements that we sign on, they remain within the framework of signing. They are not translated into policies or integrated or aligned with the laws, etc. How can we penetrate this aspect regarding the climate and be there at all the platforms and forums or decision-making positions? This is something I think a lot about, and I'm trying to think loud here. I'm trying to think. We need to develop strategies in this respect. And this is something that irritates me. I always try to think about it and try to find some suggestions or recommendations.
Thank you very much, Afaf.
قد يكون هناك قلت تشابه كثير ولا.
I said that there are similarities, but Palestine is of course a special case. When we address the aspects that my colleagues discussed, they're similar, but what's different is that Palestine is under occupation, and therefore there is more complexities. Actually, I believe it's more complicated than any other place. We find this very tangible, especially when it comes to water and stealing the water by the occupation, and thus the scarcity of water of the per individual or per capita here in Palestine, and thus the suffering, the increasing, and the majority who are suffering from this issue are women. Women, due to their situation. I don't prefer to say that we are more vulnerable or etc. No, I'd rather say although this is a result, but I personally don't like to think of women like that as being vulnerable, because we have too many responsibilities. We suffer more due to our bigger responsibilities. The scarcity of water in Palestine, because it is stolen by the occupation. The other thing is there is a pollution, or what contaminates the Palestinian environment the towers that are being built by the occupation in many places that only pollutes the air and contaminates the environment, leading to the spread of diseases such as the cancer, for example. Also, the water of residues and the wastewater that is dropped by the occupation into the Palestinian land. What I mean to say is that there are international treaties or conventions. There are articles, clear articles and items. However, these are not, this occupation is not obligated to have respect for these conventions. And there are no limits to such violations by the occupation, which also necessitates solidarity, regional, Arab, and international solidarity and support, also to disclose such violations and such behavior resulting from the occupation. This is enough for me. If I'm given more chance later, maybe I'll be able to speak. I apologize again for taking much of your time. These are just very quick ideas or reflections. I don't have a paper actually, but this is just a reflection in the framework of your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you. All of us knows how important Palestine is, particularly because, well, the Palestinian people is suffering. We share that and we appreciate very much your words in this. So anybody else can take the floor and to share with us some ideas or questions or remarks about the interventions before. The floor is open. If nobody wants to take the floor now, so maybe it's the time for the video, if it is possible to share it. What do you think, Barbara? Or I don't know, it was Amine who was in charge of the video. Can you please try to share it with all of us?
سيدة من ريف عربي. أنا وتقريباً 30% من نساء الدول العربية نساء معيلات، مسؤولين بشكل مباشر وكامل عن أسرنا. السنة اللي فاتت خسرت شغلي عشان المزرعة اتسحرت، ولما حاولت أفهم.
Okay, I'm an Arab. Last year, I tried to understand why I lost my farm, my work. I found out that climate change was the cause. That's why I want to share with you how we can face climate change as women. It affects directly important sectors such as agriculture and fishing. International statistics show that half the workers in this field are women. And last scale says that the potential mortality rate of women and children is 14 times more than among women than among men. It is affecting us, especially in the developing countries like the superpowers or the developed countries. They don't give much attention to the Paris protocol, especially when it comes to the fossil fuels. The Arab country are also negligent in terms of the climate change. They don't have plans to deal with it. There's no sufficient financing to support women in facing all these disasters, natural and climate disasters. We and the rest of women are requesting the support for women by developing policies to compensate women against the impact of climate change, expanding the adaptation policies and mechanisms to guarantee our protection for women. So to be ready to face or confront the disasters before they take place. Also being sensitive to our needs as priorities and try to design solutions for us at a local, regional, and international levels. Also empower women in facing the impact and results of the climate change.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, really.
ممتاز شكرا جزيلا.
We will put subtitles in English, Marga, after.
Yes, we can. We can help in doing so. It's really beautiful, and also
We'll
we
work
can
on that.
distribute it here. So, Fatemah, if you like, my proposal is I see Harel Kwasas to ask for the floor, so we can give her the floor for a couple of minutes. And after that, I will suggest our friend Fatemah Khafagy to lead the last 5 minutes in the question of the conclusions of the seminar and also the steps forward. So if you agree, I will give the floor for 2 minutes. Harel Kwasas, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for everyone who helped.
شكرا جزيلا لتنظيم هذا اللقاء المهم. معلومات مهمة. سؤالي حول الخطوات التالية: ما هي المهام أو التوصيات المحددة التي يمكننا أن نتمكن كمجموعة أو كجماعة أن نتواصل للمشاركة قبل المشاركة في كوب 27؟ السؤال التالي هو حول الشبكات الاجتماعية الأخرى والمجموعات المعنية الأخرى والنشطاء. هل عملنا على محاولة من هؤلاء الأشخاص من المنطقة العربية؟ وإذا لأن هذه المهمة.
Sorry, I think there was a confusion in the channel. You have to put the other one.
Sorry about that, because I'm sorry about that, because there are other people who
the question in summary is how we cooperate with other social movements and networks in bringing forward our specific asks and demands. And فاطمة عشان أترجم لك على السريع كان عندي سؤالين. السؤال الأول: ما هي مطالبنا المحددة باتجاه
What are our demands towards COP27, like 4 or 5 requests? The other question was about, I'm sorry, I can't hear because there are others who have their mics on.
Sorry, Hajil, go ahead.
التعاون مع مجموعات أخرى. إذا إحنا
So who are the other groups? Who are the other groups that we can collaborate with in making our requests or demands? A diagnosis is really good, but we need action and practical steps. In order, we need to be more clear about the step forward. I wanted to ask the speakers, mainly those from the Arab countries, if you have specific plans to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadil, for this important question. So I see Ghalia. We don't have much time. So Ghalia, if it's a question or very short note, I will give you the floor. Okay, if not, I think I would like to give the floor to Fatemah for the conclusions or for the ideas to the step forward. So Fatemah Khafagy, please, the floor is yours for the conclusions.
شكرا.
Thank you. I want first to thank Europe, France, and Marga and for their support under the climate changes in the Arab region. They are with us step by step. They provide us with information, and this webinar will continue to have synergy. They would ask us for anything, whatever we ask them, they are always supportive. Thank you, Marga. I want also to thank Hadil from Oxfam, who helped us in too many things. We've been, since a few months, working on this topic. We were able to achieve national level papers in a number of countries. We want these papers to be accessible, and also in all the Arab world. We want to have a regional paper thanks to Dr. Laila Iskander. We have a video that can be shared with the people to know more about the climate change and its impact. We have also material from Lebanon, as a case from Lebanon, who helped us also in a training material with valuable information about climate. Thanks Oxfam for helping us in the policy paper, in the video, and in the training material that we already have. So we have good things or materials that we can use to raise the awareness in the different countries and at the regional levels. We can be able to communicate with a number of parties and people, individuals. What to do? What's next? Hadil asked this question. In Egypt, for example, we are in connection with other groups who work on the climate change issues. There's a big group that involves associations who work on environment and climate. There are academics also from many universities, from Egyptian and universities abroad. They do meetings, regular meetings and trainings. I'm sure other countries would find there are other groups who are also working, and we hope that there is more encouragement. We encourage you to communicate with them in the other countries, our colleagues, to communicate with them. What we're doing so that our voices are heard, whether at COP27 or 28. We can only have impact or influence on our own government. They need to listen to us. And this can only be done or achieved in an ongoing lobby. We've done 2 webinars. The next webinars, or in the next webinar, we want each and every one of us to know more than one government parties who have a relation with the environment and climate. We need to invite these people to listen to us in this webinar. We have to also participate with our regional or national papers to send them to the decision makers locally about our papers on the climate. We are with Transform Europe. We are with the groups from Africa who both don't have problems and they will be attending that COP. They don't have problems in attending the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh or in the Emirates. They are also ready to help us to be able to participate through them. So that's all that we have in hand now. As a group or as a network, we are also connected with UN Women, with the regional UN Women Office. We will have a meeting with them beginning of August. We will know how they would help us have our voices heard. They also disseminate the papers, they post the papers or publish the papers. They can also help us be present at Sharm el-Sheikh next November. So these are the steps that we can do regarding conveying our voice. We continue to disseminate our knowledge about the climate and its impact on women, and to the groups who don't have access to information. We continue to continue with this, and we want to continue to do work papers or worksheets. We already have 5 from the Arab world, but we want more countries to be involved. We will continue with our seminars. Like I said, we'll try to involve more parties from the government. We want all to reach reach out to involved people in other countries. Our goal is also to make our voices heard in such an important topic. Nothing about us without us. This is the slogan we continue to use, and we have the right to be heard. This is the main goal that we're all working on. I believe that's all I wanted to say. This is the only path that we need to follow. And we are open to any suggestions or recommendations. If you want to share with us, please do. Marga, please, and if Dr. Laila Iskander is still with us. Because she has her connections with the government side, she might be helpful. I think she left. All right, because we're over that 2 hours now. We would be happy to have an ex-environment minister be with us, and she's important. She's one of the first who called for the halt of fossil fuels. She was Dr. Laila Iskander, and she can also help us in connecting the government in Egypt and the organizers of COP27.
And thanks a lot for organizing this. Thank you for also taking care of actually for helping us covering the cost of translation. And we appreciate all the support you've been giving us as Transform Europe.
Together we are stronger. Thank you very much. Really, thank you.
شكرا للجميع. نراكم قريب وكل سنة وانتم طيبين بمناسبة عيد
Thanks all, and happy Eid, happy Adha Eid to everyone. Thank you.
مع السلامة عاشت جهودكم عين.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Fatemah.
شكرا للجميع.
نراكم على خير إن شاء الله.
Thank you all.